Twilight Fables, where the stories you thought you knew are reborn in shadow. Tonight, we begin the tale of a princess who did not sleep but wandered. This is the story of the Sleepwalker Queen. There once was a kingdom where silence reigned louder than song. It sat hidden in the northernmost forests, wrapped in bramble and perpetual mist, where the sun filtered through the canopy like diluted gold. Travellers spoke of it in hushed tones, of a place frozen in stillness, where time was not quite broken, but bent, twisted by a curse that had seeped into stone and soil. Its name had been erased by the very magic that bound it, and only the old folk remembered what it had once been called, Australian, the realm of blooming light. But there was no light left. The castle, once the jewel of the realm, stood veiled in thorned ivy, its towers strangled by creeping black roses that bled dark sap. No banners flew from its ramparts, no bells rang through its halls. Inside, shadows clung to the air like mildew, and the echoes of long-forgotten laughter twisted into a low, ceaseless whisper. And through those haunted corridors walked a girl. No footsteps announced her. Her bare feet glided across the cold marble as if she floated just above it. Her dress, once pink and bright with youth, hung loose, colourless from time and dust, its hem shredded by years of dragging. Her golden hair, long as ivy vines, swept behind her like a bridal train. Her eyes were open, but they saw nothing. Princess Aurora had not fallen asleep when the curse took hold. She had never truly closed her eyes. Instead, she had risen from the prick of the spindle like a marionette yanked upright, lips parted just enough to breathe, enough to murmur. The fairy's curse had missed its mark, twisted by something, some deeper force that lived beneath the surface of dreams. And in that misfire, something ancient had awakened inside her. The curse had been foretold, of course. On the day of Aurora's christening, 7 fairies had bestowed their blessings: beauty, grace, wit, and all the usual gifts royalty collects like baubles. But the 8th, the one uninvited, had come nonetheless. She was no wrinkled hag in black, but something more unsettling. A child in a veil, her face half lit as though caught between dusk and dawn. She arrived barefoot, smelling of lavender and ash. "I give her sleep," she said softly, "a sleep that moves." The queen had laughed nervously. The king had demanded her removal, but it was too late. The curse had rooted in Aurora's blood, coiled around her breath, and nestled between each beat of her heart. The castle's priests tried cleansing spells. The alchemists brewed antidotes. Nothing unravelled it. All they could do was hide the spindles, bury the wheels, and pray. When Aurora turned 16, her curiosity betrayed her. The old woman in the northern tower hadn't meant harm. She spun thread out of habit, hands gnarled and blind, unaware of the laws that forbade her work. Aurora, drawn by a sound only she could hear, a low hum like wind trapped in a bottle, climbed the winding steps. She touched the spindle's point. There was no scream, no collapse, no gentle descent to the floor. She stood. The woman gasped, clutching her chest as Aurora's eyes clouded over like fogged glass. Her mouth opened. A slow, hushed murmur crawled from her lips, a language not meant for the waking world. The old woman, weeping in confusion, reached for her. She slept before her fingers ever brushed the girl's sleeve. They thought she was in shock at first. The castle servants whispered she was grieving, she was praying, she was haunted by something unseen. But days passed, and Aurora did not speak in full words. She only murmured soft syllables that made the cook forget what he was doing, that made the maids stumble into closets and fall asleep standing. A steward once tried shaking her. He wept blood from his nose and collapsed in a twitching heap. The king called for help. None came. The mist around the kingdom thickened. The roads grew strange, curving back toward the forest, even when travellers tried to leave. The rivers rerouted, the birds stopped migrating, and the moon rose in odd shapes. Once, a crescent curved inward, as though biting itself, and Aurora wondered. It was the queen who first succumbed. She followed the sounds, her daughter's voice echoing through the halls at midnight, calling softly, gently, like a mother humming lullabies in reverse. The queen trailed her through chamber after chamber, watching her daughter float across the floor. Her heart broke with every step. "Aurora," she whispered, "come back to me." The girl turned, her mouth moving. The queen saw her eyes, clouded, pearly white, and then the queen laid down where she stood, atop the cold floor of the banquet hall, and slept. She still lies there, eyes closed, hands folded neatly, as if expecting dinner to be served any moment. 1,000 cobwebs wrap around her body like silk mourning veils. The king did not last much longer. It became a kind of plague. Servants would vanish for hours and be found curled in cupboards. A guard once fell asleep mid-stride and crashed through a stained glass window without ever waking. Some tried to flee the castle. None made it past the gates. The air around Aurora shimmered faintly, like heat on stone. Her whispers travelled further and deeper. Entire wings of the castle fell under her spell. Soon, the castle wasn't just quiet, it was dead silent. Except for her, she walked and whispered and walked some more. Her face remained ageless, soft, with a faint smile, as though dreaming something pleasant. No food passed her lips, no rest ever came. Her steps were tireless, her voice never ceased, and in her presence reality softened, walls bent in the corners, mirrors refused to reflect her, candles burned blue. Far beyond the forest's reach, the legend grew, a castle full of sleepers, a princess who never aged, a kingdom sealed by thorns and time. Adventurers came to find her, treasure seekers, holy men, princes. They brought torches, spells and swords. None returned, except one. He came crawling out of the forest with his hair turned white and his jaw unhinged. He babbled like a broken music box, spitting teeth as he choked on dream fragments. She walked, he cried. She walked, and she sang. No, not a song. It wasn't a song. He expired before he could say more, his fingers still twitching in the rhythm of her steps. In the 100th year of the curse, someone else entered the forest. He did not wear armour, he did not carry banners or claim noble birth. His name was lost to time, if he ever had one at all, but his face was sharp, pale and sun-starved, and his eyes glinted like moonlight on still water. His lips never moved, his hands were always cold. The forest parted for him, the thorns receded, the sky watched silently, and when he reached the gates of the castle, he did not knock. He opened the great iron doors with a breath. Inside, he found the kingdom as it had been for a century. Sleeping bodies draped across banisters, frozen mid-motion. One man stood still, caught in the act of pouring wine that never spilled. A child lay across the stairs, clutching a wooden duck. Dust painted everything in grayscale. The silence was absolute, except for the whispering. He followed it. It echoed through the halls, turning corners where no mouths moved. A lullaby sung backward, a confession in a forgotten tongue. He walked deeper, past candelabras curled with rust, past portraits with eyes scratched out, past windows where no light shone through. At last he found her. She stood beneath a shattered chandelier, face tilted toward the ceiling, as though watching stars that no longer existed. Her dress hung from her like a shed skin. Her lips moved without sound at first. Then, "Don't wake me!" Her eyes turned to him, and for the first time in 100 years, Aurora smiled with purpose. The sound he made was not human. His knees hit the marble with a crack. Blood spilled from his ears. Aurora stepped toward him, slow and graceful, whispering as she went. All around them, the castle began to change. The sleeping bodies twitched. The walls pulsed faintly, as though breathing. A low moan of air pushed through every corridor, like a single long breath. And then the whisper spread again, not just from her lips, but from every stone and shadow. Every sleeper opened their mouth and whispered the same dream. And deep within the floor, something ancient stirred. The Sleepwalker Queen had found her dreamer. The whisper did not end. It blared through the very stone, The floor quivered with it. Dust rose from the ground in thin rivulets, trembling in the low vibration that echoed from nowhere and everywhere. It was not a sound meant for waking ears. It was a language of the dream world, unformed and unspeakable, and the longer one listened, the more it began to say your name. The man knelt before her, arms limp at his sides, breath shallow. His veins pulsed visibly beneath his skin. His eyes rolled once, twice, and then settled, white, glassy, mirroring her own. Aurora leaned closer, head cocked slightly, as though considering him. Then she spoke again. "Don't wake me." He did not answer, could not. Blood stained his teeth now, a slow dribble from where his tongue had begun to split. He did not cry out. No fear crossed his face, only stillness, as though his body had remembered something. His mind had long forgotten. Aurora reached out and touched his forehead, and in the instant her skin met his, he collapsed inward, not like a man dying, but like a page folding shut. His body spasmed, condensed, and shivered into itself, his outline blurred, his bones bent in ways that bones should not bend. Then, with a soft sigh, he was gone. His clothing fell to the marble floor, empty and warm. Aurora blinked once. The whispers deepened. Across the castle, the slumbering stirred. They did not wake, they shifted. The queen, lying in the banquet hall, opened her mouth and whispered Aurora's name. The king, still seated on his throne, now wept in his sleep. Tears that rolled down waxen cheeks and vanished before they reached his collar. The guards at the gates, frozen in mid-draw of their blades, softly echoed her hum. Maids slept-walked in place. Cooks turned to face walls. The grand chandelier above the ballroom began to sway gently, though no wind moved, and then, all at once, the dream deepened. It folded inward. The castle changed, not violently, not loudly, but in a way that made your skin itch if you stared too long. The hallways grew longer than they had any right to be. Doors appeared where none existed before, arched, made of bark and bone, some pulsing with soft light as though breathing. Portraits shifted expressions. A tapestry of Aurora as a child now bore a second face behind her own, a shadow with white eyes, and outside the garden withered into grotesque beauty. The roses, once dormant, bloomed black, their petals rimmed in red, as if dipped in fresh blood. The trees bent their trunks toward the windows of the castle, as if listening. The forest beyond fell silent. No wind, no bird song, no rustling leaves, only that single, endless whisper that bled from the very stones. Beneath the castle, something woke, not with eyes, for it had none, not with hands, for it did not need them. It had been waiting, sleeping beneath the foundation of the world, below time and light. Its name had not been spoken in millennia, not because it was forbidden, but because it had never truly been given one. It was older than language, older than dreaming, but Aurora's voice had reached it, and it remembered her. The touch of her voice unfurled like a beckoning. She was not merely cursed, she was chosen, not by the eighth fairy, but by something else, something that had watched the making of the world through closed lids. When she pricked her finger on the spindle, she had not simply fallen into sleep, she had opened a door. Her soul had crossed into that liminal space between reality and dream, and her body remained as a conduit, walking, whispering, calling. And now she had fed it. The man, whoever he had once been, was the offering, the first. In the western wing of the castle, the nursery stirred. The toys rattled on the shelves. The rocking horse began to sway slowly, creaking. A cracked doll turned its porcelain head toward the open window and grinned with broken teeth. Aurora walked through the hallway just outside, trailing her fingers along the wall. Her nails scratched softly, a sound like someone writing on a coffin lid. Her mouth moved continuously. She never stopped. The language of dreams unfurled from her lips, and behind her the shadows thickened. They no longer fled from the light. They followed her now. At the edge of the corridor, the suits of armour that once stood silent in ceremonial formation had turned slightly, just enough to face her as she passed. Her eyes rolled upward. She smiled. Far beyond the cursed lands, a kingdom stirred. In a monastery built from sunstone and prayer, monks studying star maps paused mid-recital. One of them dropped his quill. Another began to speak in tongues and scratched spirals into the floor. They did not know why. They did not know her name, but they had felt something, a shudder in the fabric of sleep itself. An oracle sat up in her bed, weeping. "Aurora walks," she whispered, "in a distant tower, buried within a library built by the bones of saints." A scholar named Lysar closed his book. He had read the legends, the sleeping queen, the thorned castle, a princess who awaited a prince's kiss. But he had also studied the older versions, the ones no longer shared with children. In those, the princess did not sleep. She wandered. In those, the dream was not her prison, but her kingdom. And if she had begun to whisper again, if her voice was spreading once more, it meant something had gone wrong, or worse, something had gone right. Lysar stood slowly. He reached into the drawer and drew forth a small blade, carved from obsidian and etched with silver runes. He whispered a prayer, then he whispered her name, and he felt it echo back. Back inside the castle, Aurora entered the throne room. The king remained unmoving. His crown had slipped sideways, dust layering his shoulders like snowfall. His eyes twitched beneath the lids. His fingers moved as if playing an invisible harp. Aurora approached, one foot after another, not touching the floor. A shimmer followed her, soft like heat waves. Her lips parted, the whisper deepened. "Don't wake me." The king's lips moved, just slightly. She leaned forward, her breath warm against his forehead, and the king shattered, not loudly, not with gore. He simply folded, like paper. His body shrank into itself. His robes collapsed in on empty air. Another offering. Aurora tilted her head back and sighed. The shadows behind her bowed low. Deep beneath the foundation, the ancient thing swelled. It pulsed once, then again. The walls in the dungeons cracked. A low groan reverberated through the underground stones. The thing began to climb, not in the way a beast climbs, not in form, but in presence. It bled upward, through floorboards and fireplaces, through the seams of the castle, through the beds of the sleepers. It was in the breath of the maid who snored in the pantry, in the mouth of the stable boy curled beside the hoof of a dead horse, and in the mirror in the queen's old chamber a reflection moved, though no one stood before it. It grinned. Aurora entered the chapel last. It was the only place untouched by thorns. The candles there still burned, though they had never been lit. The stained glass glowed faintly with a silver hue. The altar, draped in white, remained pristine. Aurora stood before it and lowered her head. She whispered one final phrase, short, clipped, a prayer to something that never needed one. Then she opened her mouth wider, wider, until the skin at the corners split slightly, and the whisper turned into a scream without sound. The castle shook.
The candles flickered black,
And far away, every person who had ever dreamed of her, every bard who had sung the tale, every child who had heard it whispered as a bedtime fable, woke up at once, gasping, forgetting why they feared the name Aurora.
in their minds. Her face was gone,
But the whisper remained. The wind outside the monastery howled like a wounded beast. It was not natural wind, not the kind stirred by pressure or season. It had a pulse, a rhythm, almost as if it were breathing. The windows of the chapel creaked in protest, and the bell in the tower rang once, though no one had touched its rope. Beneath the tower, in the library where time moved slower, Lysar prepared to descend into the hidden archives. He had studied the fairy curse for years, but it had always seemed myth, a parable, a cautionary tale shrouded in metaphor, until the wind began to speak her name. It had started with dreams, not his own, but those of others, monks who woke weeping, novices who sleepwalked into the sea, animals that refused to enter the chapel. And then the silence came. Birds stopped nesting. Wolves circled the perimeter but would not cross. The forest bent toward the monastery like a tide turning to swallow it whole. And then Lysar had dreamed of her. She had stood in a long hallway of mirrors that did not reflect. Her eyes were white, her hair unbound, dragging behind her like a cape of shadows. She walked toward him with bare feet that did not touch the ground, whispering syllables that made the walls melt. He had awakened screaming. Now he carried the obsidian blade etched with silver lines, a relic passed down through those who kept the forgotten names. He descended the spiral staircase beneath the monastery and stepped into the buried chamber of thorns. This place was older than scripture. It was a vault of bindings, of contracts never spoken aloud, scrolls that bled ink, candles that burned with inverted flame. The monks had long avoided it, claiming the air beneath stank of rotten lilies, death and dreams. Lysar inhaled deeply and smelled both. He found the pedestal. Upon it sat a single volume, chained and bound in white leather that pulsed slightly, as if breathing. No title, no lock. He whispered the name. Aurora. The book snapped open. The pages did not contain text, not in the normal sense. They showed visions. A girl wandering halls where time stood still. A castle where dreams bled into waking. A whisper that called not for help, but for a vessel. For a dreamer strong enough to anchor something too large for the world. He saw her walking. He saw her feeding the castle. He saw something beneath her, vast and shapeless, coiling upward like smoke. He saw the first offering, the man with white eyes. He saw the second, and then he saw himself, kneeling before her, smiling. "No," Lysar muttered. "No, I don't." The book slammed shut. The whisper was already inside him. Back in the cursed castle, Aurora moved through the shattered chapel in silence. Her scream had fractured more than windows. It had awakened echoes. The Queen's mirror, once a gift from a foreign empire, now shimmered with shadow instead of reflection. Within it stood a copy of Aurora, identical in face, but with eyes pitch black, like 2 drops of ink floating in milk. This other Aurora did not walk. She pulsed. She watched the real one through the glass, and when the real Aurora turned, they moved in opposite directions, one clockwise, one counterclockwise. Their lips moved in tandem, then diverged. The mirror cracked. A sliver fell to the floor and bled. In the east wing, the sleepers twitched. Their mouths formed new sounds, no longer mere whispers, but phrases in a language that echoed with sleep's cold breath. They did not wake. They became something else. They stood, dozens of them, former maids, soldiers, nobles, rose as one. Their eyes remained closed, but they moved in perfect unison. They did not stumble or hesitate. They walked through the hallways in quiet rows, humming her dream. Aurora watched from the gallery above. They were her choir now, her dream marchers. Far to the south, Lysar mounted a black horse and rode for the forest's edge. The monastery bell rang again behind him, 3 times. The last time it had done that, a plague had swallowed 1/3 of the continent. He wore no armour. Armour meant nothing to a dream. Instead, he wore a cloak of white, stitched with protection symbols, and around his neck hung a piece of bone carved into a spiral. He rode for days without sleep. The land darkened. Birds flew in circles overhead. The sun dipped, but never rose fully again. The clouds thickened, as though resisting the wind that whispered her name. Aurora, Aurora, Aurora. By the 5th night, he no longer saw other travellers. By the 6th, the trees began to lean. By the 7th, the forest opened. It should not have done that. The cursed woods were said to twist paths, turn roads back upon themselves, lead wanderers in circles until they died of thirst. But Lysar did not wander. He did not choose a direction. He simply followed the whisper, and the whisper welcomed him. The thorns bowed. The path lit itself faintly with a silvery glow, as if the moon had dripped into the dirt. No insects chirped. No wolves howled. Silence walked with him. Back in the castle, Aurora approached the ballroom. The floor was glass, a gift from a neighbouring realm, meant to reflect the stars during royal dances. It had been shattered long ago, but now the shards had rearranged themselves, not as floor tiles, as images. Each shard now reflected a version of Aurora, one old, one young, one asleep, one burning, one crowned in thorns, one entirely made of roots, one with lips sewn shut. She stepped barefoot into the centre of the design. The room began to spin, not physically, but in the dream. The dream twisted, rotating around her presence, and with each turn, a memory unravelled. She remembered her childhood, but only through reflected fragments. She had not run through the garden as other princesses did. She had walked slowly, methodically. Even then, flowers closed around her presence. Bees went silent. The sun dimmed overhead. Her parents smiled, but only when she looked away. She remembered the fairies. Their gifts had meant nothing. Beauty, irrelevant, grace. She had always moved like fog. Charm. She did not speak. And then the last had come. A child in a veil, offering a sleep that moved. Aurora had not feared her. She had known her, the way water knows the well, the way stone knows the pressure of the earth. She had accepted the curse because it wasn't a curse. It was her name. Lysar reached the castle gates. They stood open. Inside, the whispers grew louder, though still barely perceptible. They did not come from the air, but from inside his head, coiling around his thoughts, turning memory soft. He tried to remember his brother's face. It slid away like paint in the rain. He stepped over a gardener's body, perfectly preserved. The man still knelt beside a bush, hand extended, frozen mid-trim. His shears hung in the air. His mouth moved faintly. Lysar passed through the front doors and into the corridor of whispers. It welcomed him like a second skin. Aurora turned her face upward. Above her, in the great ceiling of the ballroom, a new dome had formed. Not glass or stone, but dream stuff. Soft, dark, flecked with pinpricks of gold like distant stars. The dome pulsed. Within it, the shadows of her sleepwalkers danced in slow procession, bodies, faceless and boneless, twirling in the air like drowned ribbons. She opened her mouth, her whisper deepened, and deep below, the dream rose again. Lysar reached the centre of the castle. He saw her. She stood like a statue at the heart of a great pattern of glass and symbols. Her body radiated cold. Her whisper wrapped around him. He dropped to one knee, eyes flooding with silver tears. "Don't wake me," she whispered. He nodded, and with the last of his will, he drew the obsidian blade. Aurora turned and smiled. The blade in Lysar's hand was impossibly cold. It was carved from obsidian, but the darkness of it shimmered unnaturally, as though it drank the light. Thin lines of silver veinwork twisted along its surface, not engraved, but alive, shifting slightly with every breath he took. Symbols older than language. The blade did not hum or glow or cry out. It listened. Aurora stood before him, barefoot and still, her whisper coiling through the air like mist, threading through his ears and lungs, slowing his heartbeat to match the rhythm of her sleep. "Don't wake me," she murmured again. Her voice cracked slightly this time. A faint smile touched her lips, but her eyes, those clouded, ghost-pale eyes, never blinked. Lysar tightened his grip and plunged the blade into his own chest. The whisper stopped. The ballroom went silent. For the first time in 100 years, no voice echoed from the stone. No hum passed through the air. Even the shadows stilled, frozen mid-curl. Aurora's mouth opened as if to speak again, but no sound emerged. The blade glowed dimly where it jutted from Lysar's chest, flickering like a dying star. Blood soaked his robe, and yet he stood firm, one hand gripping the hilt, the other held aloft in a strange gesture. 2 fingers pointed upward, spiraling silver ink snaking along his skin. "I am not your dream," he said softly, "and you are not a prisoner." Aurora blinked once, and the floor beneath her shattered, not into pieces, into reflections. Each tile splintered into a perfect, mirrored shard, and in every one of them a version of Aurora stared back, some crying, some laughing, some screaming. One turned away, one lifted her hands as if in prayer, and one mouthed a word that sent a ripple through the glass. "Help!" Aurora staggered back. Her whisper surged again, but it was unstable now, warped. Her voice cracked in 3 tones at once, overlapping like a broken choir. Lysar stepped forward, blood dripping down his front. "You never cursed them," he said. "You're not the plague, you're the gate." Aurora's mouth trembled. She raised her hand. The air twisted between them, and then a second voice spoke. It did not come from Aurora. It came from below, from the cracks in the floor, from the breathless mouths of the sleepers, from the walls, which now pulsed slowly, like lungs filling with something not quite air. The voice spoke through them. "You are late. It did not echo. It pressed like cold stone against skin, like memory rubbed raw. Lysar turned toward the sound, but found no source. His knees threatened to buckle, but he held his ground. You are the one it chose, he whispered. Not her. The air trembled. Aurora fell to her knees. Her whisper turned into a gasp. The Sleepwalker Queen, for the first time, looked afraid. The dream cracked, not like glass, like an egg. Hairline fractures ran across the walls of the castle. Paintings bled. Chandeliers twisted into strange, spiralling shapes. The stained glass windows began to melt, colours running like candle wax. The sleepers stood still, frozen mid-step, their mouths still open, but the hum had stopped, and beneath the castle the thing moved. It had no body, not as mortals understood it. It was concept, hunger made real, longing without limit. For centuries it had drifted in the space between waking and sleep, feeding on the unconscious, rooting itself in the hearts of those who had dreamed of sorrow, beauty, and death. Aurora had not created it, she had invited it. The spindle had pierced more than skin, it had pricked the veil, and the whisper that followed was not her own, it was its voice. And now its time had come. Lysar reached into the folds of his cloak with his free hand and drew out the final relic, a small circular mirror, no bigger than a coin, bound in woven bone. He lifted it high. The glass showed no reflection, only stars, countless stars, spiralling inward. By the spiral, Lysar said, I name you. He turned to Aurora. You are the doorway, then to the empty air, and you are the trespasser. The whisper returned, a scream without breath. The sleepers convulsed. Aurora clutched her head, her body jerking like a marionette in the hands of a cruel puppeteer. The mirror glowed white, and then silence. The spiral expanded, light and shadow twisted around it, forming a perfect gyre above Lysar's outstretched hand. The room bent inward. The very walls began to curl toward the point of the spiral, warping like parchment near fire. Aurora screamed. It was not a whisper. It was a girl's scream, raw, human, terrified. Stop! The ancient voice bellowed in response, deeper than thunder. She is mine. Lysar spoke the word that unmade the veil. Return. The world shattered. Lysar stood alone. The castle was gone. No thorns, no stone, no sleepers, only grey. An endless plain of ash-coloured nothing, stretching forever in all directions, soft as silk, thick as fog, a place between places, and across from him stood Aurora, no longer sleepwalking, no longer whispering. She stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. I didn't mean to, she said. Her voice was soft, normal. I was dreaming, and it was beautiful at first. Then it started speaking to me. Then I couldn't wake up. It used my body, my voice. I didn't know how to stop it. Lysar knelt. You weren't meant to hold it. I didn't want to. Tears welled in her eyes. Her skin flickered. Faint traces of rootwork ran beneath her flesh, like vines beneath snow. Is it gone? She whispered. Lysar shook his head slowly. No, but it's sleeping again. You closed the door when you screamed. I thought I was the door. You were, and now you're the lock. The grey plain began to fade. Aurora looked around. What happens now? Lysar touched the spiral mirror, now cold. Now, he said, you choose to sleep. Aurora stepped forward, but this time, he added, truly sleep. No walking, no whispering. She nodded. He reached out a hand. She took it, and the world changed again. In the castle, once known as the Australian, the thorns withered. The cobwebs turned to dust. The air warmed. The stone walls uncurled, returning to their rightful place. The sleepers awoke one by one. The queen blinked, confused. The king stirred. The guards lowered their weapons and looked at one another. The spell had lifted, and in the centre of the ballroom, Aurora lay sleeping, not standing, not whispering, but resting peacefully for the first time in a century. And Lysar stood beside her, watching, guarding. The knife was gone, the mirror was gone, and deep beneath the earth, in a place no one would ever touch again, something stirred once, and then fell still. The dream path coiled tighter as Lysar pressed forward, the castle warping with every step. What had once been stone and mortar now pulsed like the inside of a lung, warm, wet, and flexing gently in time, with a heartbeat that did not belong to him. The torches he lit burned blue and then green, and then finally gave up, swallowed by the darkness, like drops of ink in an endless sea. But still he moved forward, guided now by instinct and not vision. He was far past the waking world, far past reason. His journal had long since closed itself, its pages soaked through with dew that had no source, his thoughts scattered like dried herbs, tossed into a whirlwind, barely clinging to a name, a purpose. Aurora, the queen, the weeping girl in the centre of the dream. He followed her still, though he hadn't heard her voice since the scream that had shaken the spires of the castle. Now only silence, no worse. The soundlessness wasn't empty, it was heavy, like the air was pressing its finger to his lips and begging him not to scream. Even as something terrible approached, the castle breathed, and when it exhaled, petals of shadow flaked from the ceiling and drifted downward like dead snow. The walls trembled in slow rhythms, cracking open with thin fractures that bled whispers, thin, fluttering, too soft voices that asked questions in 100 languages at once. Do you know what she dreams of? What colour is her sleep? Will you trade your eyes for a kiss? He ignored them all. Ahead, The corridor narrowed, folding in on itself like a throat. Lysar pressed his shoulder through the tight space and gasped as the wall pressed against his ribs and spine. He had to crawl now. The castle wanted him to stop. The dreams wanted him to sleep. He could feel their hands, velvet and delicate, reaching for his eyes. He bit his tongue until he tasted blood. It worked. The pain brought a shred of clarity. One more chamber, he thought. There's always a final chamber in stories. When he burst through the tight opening, he collapsed into an antechamber lined with glass. But the mirrors did not reflect his image. Instead, they showed moments from 100 different lives. Children playing in snowy courtyards, lovers walking past candlelit bridges, a king stabbing himself at a throne, a queen feeding her newborn to a snake, a scholar writing by a dying fireplace, a man walking into a castle swallowed by dreams. Lysar looked away. In the centre of the room, there was no pedestal, no altar, just a single strand of gold hair, stretched taut between two crystal needles, stabbed into the stone floor. It hummed. He stepped closer. The hair shimmered, and as he neared, the mirrors went dark. Then the strand snapped. From the broken filament, light poured, gold at first, then black. It flooded the room, soaking the walls, rising like water around his ankles. Not wet, not fire, but dreamlight, thick and soft and choking, and within it, Aurora. She rose from the centre of the light, not walking, not floating, but simply appearing. Her sleepwalker's dress, made of torn veils, her feet bare, her face frozen in a half-smile that seemed carved from ivory. Her eyes were still closed, her mouth moving without voice. She was whispering again, but this time he heard it, not in his ears, but in his bones. "I am all of them now," she said. "Who?" "The dreamers, the sleepers, the ones who waited, the ones who were forgotten." Lysar stepped forward. "You're not her. You're not the girl I saw in the vision. You're something else." Aurora turned her head toward him, eyes still shut, and smiled fully now. "I was her. She fell. I stood. Now we are one." The dream light surged, and behind her, the shadows of others began to rise. Figures with blurred faces and hollow eyes, their outlines soft as smoke, their hands reaching toward her like desperate children. She was a beacon, and they were moths, or corpses, or memories, or all three. "I came to stop you," Lysar said. "I brought the blade." He raised it. The obsidian edge glistened, humming softly, a shard of forgotten gods. But his hands trembled. Aurora tilted her head. Her lips stilled. The room fell silent again. "You came to wake me." "No," Lysar whispered, his grip faltering. "You've already woken, and it's killing the world." She took one step forward. The dream light parted like water. "The world is a lie. Sleep is the truth. I have seen the other side of silence, a voice, his own voice, rang in his ears, sharp and panicked. "Do not listen to her." He turned and saw himself in the mirror behind him. The reflection gripped the hilt of the blade more tightly than he did. It was not a copy. It was him, awake, alive, and unbroken. That version stepped forward through the glass and took his place beside him. Two Lysars now stood before her. Aurora opened her eyes. They were not eyes, they were gates. Behind them roiled something ancient, moons made of bone, forests of glass, oceans made of teeth and time, a world no mortal mind could comprehend, and hers had stared into it too long. The woman was gone. What remained was a temple to something unspeakable. "I am sorry," the mirror Lysar said. "We should have come sooner." And with that, he stepped forward and plunged the blade into Aurora's chest. There was no scream, only a shiver. The dreamlight cracked like a wineglass. Aurora reached up, not in pain, not in fear, but in confusion. The blade had pierced her heart, but no blood came out. Instead, a fine, white sand spilled from her chest, drifting in spirals. Her smile did not fade. Her eyes did not close. "You cannot kill a dream." "No," Lysar said, stepping beside his reflection. "But we can bind it. Together." They placed their hands on the hilt. The blade pulsed and then melted, flowing into her body like ink into cloth. She fell, not with grace, not like a queen, but like a puppet with cut strings. Her body struck the stone floor with a sound like wet paper, and then the silence broke. The castle groaned, the walls cracked, the mirrors shattered, each revealing a fragment of sky beyond, a real sky, blue and wide and full of sound, birdsong, wind, voices. The breath of the waking world came rushing in. The dream light began to burn away, curling into smoke, lifting off the ground like fog in morning sun. The shadows vanished, one by one, sighing as they went. Aurora did not move. The curse was broken, or so they thought. Lysar woke in the garden. The sun was too bright, the flowers too vivid, the sounds of bells and laughter in the distance. He sat up slowly, disoriented. Aurora sat beside him. Her eyes were closed again, but she smiled. He panicked. She opened them, normal now, blue and bright. "I'm awake," she said softly. "I think. Are you?" He tried to answer, but found that he couldn't speak. His voice had been left behind. A small price, perhaps. The castle stood again, restored. The world around them hummed with life. But Lysar noticed something odd in the flowers. Some petals were growing backward. Some bees flew without wings. Time hiccuped once or twice. She reached out and held his hand. "You pulled me from the deep, but I left a door open." He looked up. The moon was out, though it was morning. "I don't think the dreams are done with us," she said. And far, far below the roots of the castle, something opened a single, massive eye. It had not been killed. It had only been noticed. Lysar no longer trusted the shape of the corridor ahead. Stone walls bent where no stone should bend. The floor rippled in his periphery like water at the edge of sleep. At times, the hallway stretched into impossible lengths, only to curl back in on itself like a serpent devouring its tail. He'd etched his path with chalk, but when he turned to check his marks, they whispered and rubbed away of their own accord, like they were ashamed to be remembered. The air smelled of wet dust and lavender, the scent of her. He gripped the obsidian blade tighter. Each step forward dragged against unseen resistance, like wading through a thickening dream. His boots left no sound. The silence was so dense. He heard the pulse in his ears, like a war drum. And then, footsteps, not his. They were faint at first, soft as moth wings, but they quickened behind him, staggered, unsteady. He turned, expecting shadows. Instead, a figure emerged from the corridor's haze, a young woman in a servant's dress, barefoot, eyes wide and unblinking. Her mouth hung open slightly, and her limbs twitched, as if moved by puppet strings. Her eyes were blank. She walked right past Lysar without acknowledging him, brushing his shoulder. Coldness followed, a wave of it. He looked back. More were coming, men and women in castle garb. A cook with a bent ladle still gripped in hand. A boy, no older than 10, with blood trickling from his nose. All sleepwalking, all deathly pale. They marched past Lysar and deeper into the corridor, like rats drawn to a distant piping. Their mouths moved, whispering. "Aurora," one hissed. "We dream her," said another. "She's waking us." Then silence again. Lysar stepped aside and let them pass. Dozens now, a funeral procession of the dreaming. Some were weeping, some were smiling, and none could see. He followed them. The corridor began to change. As Lysar walked, the floor below his boots shifted from stone to polished wood, then to moss, then to velvet. Doors lined the walls, each carved with symbols that changed when he blinked. One bore the shape of a cradle, another a spinning wheel, a third a window full of stars. He passed them all. The dreamers were ahead, forming a circle. They had gathered in what appeared to be a great hall, long abandoned and overtaken by twisted ivy. The once grand chandeliers hung like skeletons, metal limbs bent and cracked. The stained glass windows wept dark condensation. In the centre of the room stood Aurora, or rather, a version of her. She did not seem to see them. Her head tilted upward, as if listening to a voice above. Her eyes were glazed over with a shimmer like frost. Her nightgown, once white, now shimmered with faint threads of black and violet, stitched with impossible patterns that changed when Lysar tried to focus. The sleepwalkers knelt before her, and she began to speak. but not in words. The language was older than the body. It entered Lysar not through his ears, but his mind, a crashing, bleeding sound, like a lullaby sung underwater, broken into shards. One by one, the sleepers began to twitch, their heads jerked, fingers spasming, lips frothing. One woman shrieked and laughed at once. Another tore at their scalp as if something inside begged to crawl out. And Lysar saw it. From Aurora's open mouth came threads, thin, silver strands, like spider silk, drifting into the mouths and ears and eyes of the sleepers, threads that pulled, threads that bound. He stepped forward. "Aurora," he said. Her eyes locked on him. Suddenly, everything stopped. The sleepwalkers froze mid-spasm. The threads hovered, motionless in the air. And Aurora smiled. Not gently, not kindly. It was the smile of someone who remembered things that others had long buried. The smile of the sea, just before it devours a ship. "Lysar," she said, his name like smoke. "You dream too loudly." He gripped the blade. "You're not her," he said. Aurora tilted her head. "I am what's left when she sleeps." "You're the curse." She laughed, but her voice cracked like a broken music box. She was cursed, yes, but curses don't stay still. They grow, they think, they learn. Do you know how long I have wandered these halls? How many dreams I have borrowed? She stepped toward him, and with each step, the sleepers around her jerked like puppets. Their bodies echoed her movements. I was born of spite, a godmother's bitterness made flesh. I was supposed to sleep, but I walked, and walking, I saw the world between breathing. I saw the one beneath. The hall trembled. From beneath the floor, something knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. Each thud sent cracks up the columns. Dust rained from the rafters. One stained glass window shattered, and black moths poured in. "You've awakened it," Lysar whispered. "I did nothing," she said. It listened. He raised the blade. The obsidian caught no reflection, only shadow. Aurora raised her hand. Her fingers curled inward, slow and deliberate. The sleepers rose. Their eyes burned white. They lunged. Lysar dodged the first wave, slicing low at a cook's legs. The blade moved through the man like water. He crumpled silently, still breathing, eyes vacant. He struck again and again, never aiming to kill, only to disarm, disable, survive. These people were not monsters, not yet, but they were hers now. Aurora moved like drifting smoke. She crossed the space between them in a blink, hand outstretched. "Lysar," she murmured, and suddenly he remembered. A hallway of sunlight, a child's voice, a pale girl in a flower crown, humming beside a pond. "You," he gasped. "We met when we were young," she whispered. She touched his cheek. "You gave me a dandelion." The memory flooded him, real, undeniable. "I told you to blow and make a wish," he said. Aurora smiled. And I wished for the dreams to never stop, he faltered. The sleepers stopped moving. Aurora stepped back, and behind her, the floor split open. No warning, just a rupture. Blackness spilled out like blood from a wound. A smell like rotted lilies and burnt sugar filled the air. The tiles cracked outward as something vast and serpentine rose from the chasm. It was not flesh, it was not shadow, it was something in between. A mouth opened, but not a mouth of teeth, a mouth of lullabies, of hymns, of 1,000 voices whispering secrets into the ear of the void. And from within it, a single red-spun spindle floating. Aurora turned to face it. She sleeps there now, she said. The true her, the quiet her, and I have worn her like a skin for so long that I no longer remember where I end. Lysar took one step back. I came to save you. Aurora's smile faded. You came too late. I've spun too many dreams, woken too many dead, and it has found me worthy. The black shape beneath the castle shuddered. The blade in Lysar's hand grew hot, and the dream behind his eyes began to hum. Lysar had expected screams. He had expected fire, collapse, madness, perhaps a god tearing the sky open and devouring the stars. Instead, the bell's toll left behind a silence so wide it seemed to stretch through time itself. The moment it rang, the breath of the castle stopped. The walls held their breath. The stones wept condensation. The air was sucked out of every room, and all the dreamers froze. Lysar stood in the centre of the chapel, hand still outstretched, bell rope swaying like a dead serpent. The old monk, who had held the bell rope tight, had been the first to crumble, not faint, not fall, but crumble, his flesh becoming ash, bones collapsing into themselves like dry reeds. And then came the wind. No doors opened, no windows broke, but something howled through the castle corridors, a wind that came from inside the dream. Lysar could feel it dragging across his skin, trying to pull him inward, like it was made of thousands of tiny tongues, whispering, "Come, come, come, come." He stumbled backward. The bell tower was gone, not physically, no. The walls were there, the high, narrow windows, the rope still swinging like a pendulum, but the space had bent, and it was not what it had been moments ago. Instead of leading back into the great nave, the door now opened onto a hallway made of mirrors, and in every mirror, Lysar saw her, Aurora, but not walking, floating, not upright, no longer burdened by the mimicry of human grace. Her feet dangled, her head hung at an unnatural angle, her long golden hair hung in mid-air like spider silk underwater, and her eyes, closed in every version, were now bleeding smoke. Lysar turned to retreat, only to find the bell tower behind him had vanished into a stairwell of sleep. He gritted his teeth. "You were supposed to help me," he said aloud, not knowing whether he meant the monk, the bell, or the god that no longer answered. No reply. The mirrors pulsed again. Each version of Aurora began to twitch. One smiled. One opened her mouth far too wide. One reached out, not with a hand, but with a shadow that slid across the floor and into Lysar's. He jerked his leg back. Too late, it had already found his blood. He ran through the mirrored corridor, trying not to look at the reflections, which no longer mirrored him at all. In some, he was an old man. In others, he was a boy. In one, he was sleeping, curled in the corner with a thorn in his throat. Another hallway opened suddenly on the left. He turned. Wrong choice. The moment he crossed the threshold, the floor inverted. What had been below became above, and Lysar plummeted upward, falling into a ceiling that bent into sky. He landed on a cloud of books, scrolls and tomes and journals, all tied together with hair. Some fluttered like birds, others whispered names he didn't recognize. He rolled over, gasping, and saw a figure sitting cross-legged a few yards away. A woman. She was reading from a blank page. "Aurora?" he whispered. The figure looked up. Not Aurora. Her mother. Queen Amalthea's face was made of paper, thin, creased and wet with ink. Her mouth opened with a crackling sound. "You should not have rung the bell," she said. "It was her hour, not yours. You're not real." "I am the memory of what was promised," she replied, "and the dream of what you would become if you stayed." The books beneath Lysar began to tremble. "You are unraveling," she said gently. "You have touched a god's silence. That carries a price. I don't care. You will." She reached out her hand, and Lysar saw that her fingers were made of parchment. "I offer you sleep, not death, not madness, just rest." He almost took it, almost, but then something inside him rebelled. A voice, familiar, strong. It was not his own. It was Aurora's, and it came from inside his ribs. "Don't sleep yet, Lysar. I need you awake." He flinched and drew his obsidian blade. Queen Amalthea's image hissed and tore like a page from a book caught in fire. The library collapsed. He landed in a corridor of sleeping wolves. 100 of them lined the walls, not breathing, not dead, each with a small thorn in their paw. He walked slowly, trying not to step too loudly. In the centre of the corridor stood Aurora, at least one version of her. She looked older now, regal, taller than before. Her nightgown had become a gown of bone lace, and her bare feet hovered an inch above the floor. Her eyes were still closed. "Lysar," she said softly, even though her mouth didn't move. "I'm here," he whispered. "What are you?" "I am becoming." "Becoming what?" She tilted her head. The motion was almost childlike. "I was cursed to sleep forever, but the world changed. Time did not move correctly. Sleep began to evolve. Dreams deepened. I became the centre. The wolves behind her exhaled in unison. "I tried to wake," she said, "but my soul is too far gone. My body moves now without me. My influence spreads. Because I am incomplete." Lysar stepped forward. So I complete you. She nodded. But how? She raised a hand, and the wolves opened their eyes. 1,000 golden pupils stared at him. You must go to the root where the curse was planted, the spindle. I destroyed it. You destroyed a spindle, not the spindle, not the first thorn. That lies beneath. Beneath what? Aurora's image shimmered. Beneath the dream, she said. Beneath me. And then she was gone. The corridor crumbled. The wolves turned to smoke, and Lysar fell. He awoke, this time in his own memory. He was 12, in the candlelit attic of the convent where he'd been raised. A woman in green robes stood before him. I'm going to remove your dreams, she said. He remembered this. He remembered the thorn she used. Not metal, but glass. She had pushed it gently into his ear, and everything bright had gone quiet for years. And yet, this time, it was Aurora's hand holding the thorn. You must give it back, she said. I don't want it. You must. The thorn plunged into his mind. Lysar screamed and woke. He stood at the foot of a stairwell made of flesh. The castle was gone. The air smelled of sleep and rot and rosewater. Above him, a tower pulsed, alive, beating like a heart. At its top, something waited, and it was no longer just Aurora. The veil had thinned beyond mending. The great spire of the castle, once noble and sunlit in the days of the old kings, now loomed like a jagged tooth upon the sleeping world's rotting gums. Clouds clung to its shattered peak, where strange flickers of crimson light blinked and dissolved like dying stars. Below, the land buckled and churned with dream sickness. Entire forests had collapsed inward into pits of fog and bone, and villages were no more than hollow shapes, their inhabitants walking in endless loops, murmuring words that had no meaning. Aurora's influence had fractured into thousands of shimmering threads, snaking through minds and veins, whispering to souls as they slept. But she herself had become something stranger, less a queen and more a presence, diffused through a growing web of slumbering vessels. Her physical body still roamed the upper halls of the keep, but she walked elsewhere too, through the breath of children, the eye glint of animals, the echo in bells. Lysar stood on the precipice. The final staircase before the throne room was no longer made of stone. It pulsed beneath his boots, slick and glistening like the muscle wall of some immense heart. Every step he took sent vibrations upward and downward, resonating into the dreaming below. Behind him, the scholar's cloak was frayed by clawed wind, his satchel long discarded. All that remained was the obsidian dagger, clutched in his right hand, and a charm of thorns tied around his left wrist, one of the last relics of the waking world. A voice whispered from the walls. Do you see it now? It was her voice, but not spoken. It existed only behind his eyes. Sleep is a kindness, it said. Why do you flee from peace? Lysar did not answer. He'd grown used to the lull of her whispers. That was how it always began. The soft voice that welcomed you, then it grew louder, more possessive, until it took your name and buried it beneath silk and shadow. He pressed forward. The throne room was not as he remembered it from his studies. There were no stained glass windows or vaulted ceilings. There was only a void filled with mist and starlight, and in its centre a dais of teeth, atop which sat Aurora's unmoving form. She wore a crown made of clock hands. Her gown was fashioned from pages of burned history, sewn together by strands of silver hair. Her face was the same, and yet impossibly different, unaged, too still. One eye was closed in eternal sleep, the other was open and weeping ink. "Have you come to kill me?" she asked, her voice no longer whispering, but resounding like chimes from beneath the sea. Lysar stepped closer. "Not you, not anymore. I've come to cut the root." Her smile cracked open. "There is no root, only bloom." She raised her hand. The castle shook. Around them, reality began to bend. The dais of teeth grew longer. The floor collapsed into mirrors. Reflections of Lysar bloomed from every angle, some twisted, some bleeding, some laughing. His memories spilled out around him. His childhood home now a ruin. His dead brother crawling through a hallway of flame. His first love bound to a bed of moss and sobbing. "I have given the world mercy," she said, rising now from her throne. Her voice had no mouth, no lips. It came from the air, the floor, the blood in his ears. "I let them dream. Would you rather they woke to rot and flame?" "You are no mercy," Lysar said. "You are hunger dressed in silk." He held out the obsidian blade. It pulsed with a red light. Then the floor gave way. He fell, not downward, but inward, into her, into the core of her dreaming. He awoke on a field of sleeping bodies, thousands, all curled like infants, all breathing in rhythm, bound by vines of dream root. Their eyes flickered beneath shut lids, and in their mouths small flowers grew, pale blossoms feeding on exhale. Lysar stood. He was in the root mind, the place where Aurora's influence bloomed like a fungal network. This was the true heart, not the castle, not the body. This, a trembling figure stepped from the sea of sleepers. It was a child, but its eyes were black. Its skin flaked like dry parchment. "You're not supposed to be here," it said. "I seek the sleeper," Lysar said. The child turned and pointed to the horizon, where the sky folded in on itself. "There," it whispered, "but it won't like being seen." The landscape changed with each step. Trees grew upside down. Rivers ran backward. Language fell from the clouds like rain. Letters and syllables tumbling around him, in curls of ink. Then he saw it. Not a being, not quite. A shape, a hollow, a wound in the world. The sleeper. It was enormous, spanning sky and soil, formed of 1,000 sleeping minds. threaded together in a vast coiling spiral. At its centre, a face without features. It breathed, and the world around it convulsed. Lysar gritted his teeth. This was the root, the source of Aurora's descent. Not her own will, but this ancient presence slumbering beneath reality, using her as a vessel, a womb, a voice. He approached the edge. "I name you," he shouted into the vortex. "I sever you." He raised the blade. Something screamed. It was not a sound, but a forgetting, a force so immense it erased memory as it moved. Names vanished from his mind, faces. He felt his own name slipping, but he swung the blade anyway. It struck the veil. The spiral convulsed, cracked. The world split. Light poured from the wound, and within it, Aurora, not as queen or ghost, but as a girl, crying out, her soul freed from the puppet. And the sleeper opened its eyes. The sleep had turned swore. It was not the rot of decay, but something more insidious, the kind that spreads without sound or scent. Lysar awoke at the edge of the forest, barely remembering how he got there. His armour was cracked. The runes, meant to ward off dreaming spirits, were pulsing a sickly blue, like veins under bruised skin. He should not have survived the collapse of the sleeper's chamber. The castle was gone, not in ruin, not buried, but simply absent, as if it had never stood atop the hill at all. Yet Aurora remained, not the girl they once thought a princess, nor the woman whose soul had been scattered across a century of dreams. She stood among the roots of the forest, barefoot, her hair a tangled veil, her dress the colour of bleeding dusk, and her eyes, they held too many things. "You saw it," she said softly. Lysar swallowed. His voice cracked. "I saw parts, not all of it." She nodded. "It only gives what you can bear." Behind her, the trees moved, not with wind, but breath. The sleeper had not died. The wound, Lysar dealt it, driving the blade of soul silver into its dreaming core, had slowed it, confused it, fragmented its presence, but it now lingered in Aurora, just as fragments of Aurora lingered in the world. She had become a vessel, not possessed, not consumed, but merged, as if the curse and the cursed had decided to make peace within a single body. "I'm still me," she said, "but I am also the dream." He didn't step back, but he wanted to. "Then what do we do now?" he asked. Aurora smiled, the kind of smile you give to a nightmare when you decide to walk into it instead of run. "We finish it." They travelled east, to the ruins of old Ereska, the city once ruled by dream scribes and sleep wardens. It had long ago been swallowed by vines and silence, a casualty of the first sleep wars. But beneath its cracked stones were catacombs inked with rituals and glyphs, desperate words left behind by those who tried and failed to seal the sleeper before. Aurora walked among them like someone returning home, as if her feet remembered paths Her mind did not. "Do you still hear the voices?" Lysar asked. She paused, fingers brushing a wall, carved with crescent spirals. "Not here," she whispered. "I am the voice now, or one of them." He clenched his fists. At the heart of the catacombs, they found the Drow's well, a pit filled not with water, but with thick, glimmering vapour. This was where the veil thinned, where the sleeper's true body, if it could be called a body, rested below the crust of the world. Aurora knelt beside the edge. "It wants to finish what it began," she said, "but it fears us now." Lysar laughed bitterly. "It should." Then she turned to him. "Will you come with me into it?" He hesitated. She reached out. Her touch was cold, but not cruel. He took her hand, and they stepped into the dream one last time. The sleeper's dream was no longer a single world, but shards, broken mirrors, each reflecting different possible fates. Lysar saw them all, a kingdom swallowed by sleep, a queen with skin like glass cracking, children born without breath but full of memory, a sky stitched shut by eyelids that had never opened. He floated, screamed, dissolved, remembered. Aurora was there in every piece, sometimes as queen, sometimes as beast, sometimes as the dream itself. But Lysar held to the blade, not the physical one now, but its idea, the blade of will, of choice. He used it. He found Aurora at the centre. She was kneeling before a cradle made of stone and roots. Inside, a child slept, a child that was not real, a symbol, a final seed of the sleeper. "We end it here," she said. He raised the blade. Aurora did not flinch. The cradle cracked. The dream bled out, and Lysar awoke, alone. The world had changed. People remembered dreams again, but no one walked in their sleep. The fog lifted from the forests. The sky was a colour not seen in generations. Dawn. Of Aurora, there was no sign. Only in his dreams did Lysar hear her voice now. "Thank you," it would say, or sometimes, "Don't forget," and every morning he would wake with tears and the faint scent of roses in the air. The Sleepwalker Queen had walked to the end of her dream and taken the nightmare with her. Lysar stood at the black gate of the inner sanctum, its surface shimmering like glass soaked in oil. The gate did not open. It inhaled. Behind him, the ruins of the waking world trembled. The sky above the castle spun slowly, a disk of soft shadow, a vortex of ash and stars. The spires had long collapsed into heaps of dream-corroded stone. The courtiers, the servants, the guards, all of them sleepwalkers now, wandering the ramparts in endless spirals, their eyes gone grey and wet with static. Some wept quietly, some laughed, none saw. Only Lysar remained tethered. The thing inside him moved. Aurora's final breath had passed through him, the remnants of her soul, fractured, dream-warped, unmoored from mortality, now clung to his ribs like spider silk. She had kissed him before she vanished, not with lips, but with memory, and in that moment the curse had passed into him willingly. The Sleepwalker Queen was gone, but the dream did not end. He stepped into the sanctum. The chamber was circular and impossibly wide. Pillars carved from obsidian bone ringed the perimeter, each etched with symbols too ancient to predate language. They pulsed faintly, throbbing like dying stars. And in the centre it lay, the sleeper, or what was left of it, the body, sprawled like a continent across the floor, fleshy, molten, massive. Its form had no coherence. A hill of ribs, a glacier of stitched eyelids, limbs tangled like tree roots reaching through time. Its face was hidden beneath folds of dream flesh, and from its back grew wings that shimmered in and out of existence like ghosts trying to breathe. Lysar approached it. "Do you still dream of us?" he whispered. The sleeper quivered. A dozen mouths opened. They did not speak. They bled. Not blood. Visions. Each dream that flowed from the mouths showed a different version of the world. One where Aurora ruled as a goddess of sleep. One where Lysar never woke and still knelt beside the throne. One where no one ever dreamed again. And the sky was glass. Lysar wept. He stepped forward, bones cracking beneath his skin. The silken threads of Aurora's essence inside him stirred, curling against his heart. "You fed on her," he said. A breath passed across the chamber. It tasted like birth and burial. The sleeper did not deny him. There had once been a time Lysar dreamed of peace. He saw now that peace was never the opposite of nightmare. It was simply a quieter one. He touched the creature. The moment his fingers brushed its hide, his mind ruptured. He fell into memory, not his own, but the sleeper's. He saw the first dream, a field of endless white, a child in a silver cradle, a lullaby sung by a mother made of mist. Then the lullaby stopped and the dreaming began. The child never woke. It grew old in the dream, and from its slumber the worlds were born. Realities split like seeds. Empires fell and rose, each a figment of the child's sleep. It dreamed of love, so love existed. It dreamed of pain, so pain flourished. It dreamed of queens who could not die, and eventually it dreamed of Aurora. Lysar pulled away, gasping. The sleeper groaned, a sound like stone shattering underwater. From beneath the creature's massive torso, a shape emerged, small, trembling. A girl. She looked perhaps 12. Blonde hair in ribbons, eyes wide and glassy, pale blue gown stained with ink and soot. Aurora, or rather, the first version of her. She stumbled forward, reaching for Lysar with hands too soft to hold. "Do you want to wake up now?" she asked, in a voice that echoed from 10,000 years ago. He didn't answer. Behind her, the sleeper began to sink, not downward, but inward. Its mass collapsed into itself, folding like a star at the end of its burn. The chamber cracked, then screamed, and the pillars broke like hollow bones. The dream, at last, was dying. Lysar took Aurora's hand. It felt like taking the hand of time itself. They stood in the courtyard of the ruined castle. The sky above no longer spun. The stars had returned. The sleepwalkers had stopped moving. One by one, they dropped to their knees. Some cried. Some stared skyward, mouths open. Others began to truly sleep for the first time in centuries. Lysar held the young Aurora to his chest. She breathed slowly. "Is it over?" she asked. He didn't know, because something inside him still moved. The last dream, the final ember of the sleeper. It had fled its collapsing body and taken refuge in him. He felt it growing, a seed of sleep, not infection, but inheritance. 1 year later, the kingdom is quiet, the skies are blue, the plague of dream sickness has ended. The sleepwalkers no longer wander, though few remember what happened during the lost time. Aurora, now a child again, walks the gardens with lilies in her hands and lullabies on her lips. And Lysar, he does not sleep, he cannot. He lies on a stone bed in the lowest chamber of the castle. His body is bound in silks of woven shadow. The dream threads within him pulse faintly, fed by silence. Sometimes he hums to himself. Sometimes he weeps. Sometimes he hears a mother maid of mist singing just beyond the veil. The kingdom thinks he rests, but he is not resting. He is dreaming, and one day he will wake